Welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. Can Africa defend the global trading system better than the West? It's an unlikely question, but one becoming more pertinent. In this brief special report, we look at Africa's trade dilemma, a continent that needs open markets in a world closing them, and how leaders plan to respond. This is trade, power, and Africa's place in a fragmenting global order. Take a look. According to the World Trade Organization, total intra-African trade lies between 15 and 20%. Compare that with Europe, where total intra-European trade is about 60%. Those figures for Africa are not enough to catalyze the development Africa needs to achieve under the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So what needs to change? Against the backdrop of the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland, we asked three critical questions about the future of intra-African trade. First, what type of funding will the continent need to unlock the trade-enabling infrastructure that it needs? Two, how will Africa's small and medium-sized enterprises scale enough to become meaningful employers and job creators on the continent? And thirdly, in this age where there is talk of a fracturing of global trade multilateralism, what role does African trade diplomacy have to play on the global trade negotiating table? We examine this and many more issues in this special report on African trade. Africa accounts for less than 3% of global merchandise trade, despite being home to nearly 18% of the world's population. According to the World Trade Organization, Africa's total trade in goods and services stands at just over $1.2 trillion, compared to China's more than $6 trillion and the EU's over $5 trillion. Intra-African trade, by contrast, accounts for only about 15% of total trade flows, a fraction of what we see in Europe or Asia. What Africa exports also matters. The continent remains heavily reliant on raw commodities, oil, minerals, and agricultural produce, while importing finished goods, machinery, and technology. This structure leaves African economies exposed to global price volatility, vulnerable to tariffs and trade disputes, and less able to translate trade into large-scale employment. Yet, Davos conversations this year suggest the tide may be shifting. As global trade becomes more fragmented and strategic, Africa's markets, minerals, and growth potential are drawing renewed attention, not as a charity case, but as a geopolitical and economic necessity. At the center of the global trade system sits the WTO, an institution designed to arbitrate disputes and keep trade predictable. But predictability is now under pressure. Major economies are increasingly bypassing multilateral rules in favor of tariffs, subsidies, and industrial policy. For Africa, this moment is consequential. Preferential access programs like the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, are under review, while global trade tensions from US-EU disputes to strategic competition with China reshape market access. In this continent, Africa's most ambitious response is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, covering 54 countries and 1.4 billion people. AfTA aims to create a single African market capable of absorbing African production, scaling African firms, and reducing dependence on external demand. But AfTA is not just about tariffs. It is about standards, logistics, digital trade, and regulatory alignment, the invisible infrastructure of commerce. That is why Africa's voice at the WTO matters. The message from Davos is clear. Africa cannot afford to be a rule taker in a world where rules are increasingly contested.
The key message is that now the continent of Africa is a real defender of the global trading system, the real defender of the multilateral trading system, because we have opened our markets as a continent, not only to one another, but also to the rest of the world. We have opened our investment market, not just to one another, but to the rest of the world. And so our continent is open for business on the basis of certainty, stability, predictability of markets, and a rules-based system for trade and investment, which is absolutely key. So we are a reliable partner as a continent to global investors.
Through the African Continental Free Trade Area, Africa is attempting something few regions are doing today, deepening integration rather than dismantling it. In a world drifting towards blocks and bilateral deals, Africa's collective market could become one of the last large constituencies arguing that trade works best when it is open, predictable, and fair. That position may soon give Africa not just moral authority, but strategic influence. But defending the system is only credible if trade delivers real economic outcomes, and that brings us back to jobs. Trade is not an abstract concept. It is about jobs, businesses, and livelihoods. Africa adds nearly 30 million young people to its labor force every year, yet formal job creation remains far below that number. Davos sessions on Africa's economic future returned repeatedly to one point: trade-driven growth must translate into employment, not just GDP. Cross-border trade in agro-processing, light manufacturing, digital services, and logistics offers one of the fastest pathways to employment at scale. But only if African businesses can move goods across borders efficiently, access finance, and compete on quality, not just cost. The broader Davos takeaway is sobering. The world is moving towards transactional trade where access is negotiated, not assumed. Tariffs are back, industrial policy is ascendant, and geopolitics is shaping supply chains. And in the middle of this recalibration sits Africa, a continent that trades far less than its potential, but one whose strategic importance is rising. For Africa, this raises the stakes. Trade policy must now be strategic, coordinated, and anchored in execution. For Nigeria, for instance, value addition is a missing link. Even within Africa, trade remains dominated by raw commodities. In an interview I had with the WTO DG, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, she said Nigeria has the scale to dominate African textiles, fashion, and apparel if policy, infrastructure, and trade facilitation align. She praised recent reforms at the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment and highlighted digital trade as a frontier Nigeria can move quickly on, exporting services, not just goods. Her message was ultimately one of agency. In a fragmented trade order around the world, countries that are prepared, investable, and reform-driven will still attract capital and market share. Nigeria, she suggested, has the ingredients but must now execute.
We need to add value to our products, even for the intra-African market, because we are trading even with each other. We have mostly commodities and raw materials that we're trading. And 60% of our exports elsewhere is also still raw commodities. And I know it's changing, and African leaders are recognizing now that they have to change. So they're making moves. Right. But we need to accelerate that, add value. That way we can trade different products to each other. I'm very excited that Nigeria might be able to take over the African market in textiles and apparel.
Indeed.
Because we have powerful people in fashion.
You're a true representative.
Yeah, and if we can scale it, and the Honorable Minister of Commerce, of Industry, Trade and Commerce says industry, trade and commerce.
And investment.
And investment. I'm missing one word, industry, trade and investment. Says we're already working on trying to scale up some of this. We need to scale it so we can capture the African market because we have a strong advantage in that particular area.
Africa is not entering a golden age of trade by default, but it is entering a moment of choice. A world of tariffs, power politics, and strategic trade moves can marginalize the continent, or it can be the force that will long overdue integrate the continent further, industrialize it, and enable it to compete better. What Davos 2026 has shown is this: Africa's relevance is rising, but relevance alone is not enough. The future belongs to economies that can trade, produce, and employ at scale and on their own terms.